So through doing this series, I've learned you can get away with changing hardly any of the core gameplay mechanics from Five Nights at Freddy's as long as there's a decent trade-off in the art style department. Twice, with One Night at Flumpty's being the prime example of this in my opinion. Not only that, but the tone of the game is also arguably polar opposite, existing almost primarily as a way to parody that game. And yeah, it's not hard to find things in any one of the mainline FNAF games that are inherently pretty dumb in the grand scheme of things, so a game like Flumpty's was decently refreshing at the time. But it had its problems, most notably in the gameplay department. Like, it was fine, it changed up the main gameplay about as much as the first Five Nights at Candy's did, but that's the issue here. I'll give it props for only making you play the one night, though I feel like any game that plays so similarly to the first game anyway doesn't really need more than one night to get the message across. It respects that you've probably already played the first game and by proxy, your time, which I really appreciate. So Flumpty's 2 had to do something different, making a clone of Freddy's 2 with the same gimmick as before wouldn't cut it this time, and I think Jonochrome, the guy behind Flumpty's, knew this. And so wham! This guy straight up just gives us one of the best fan games I've ever played. It's a really good game. I want to talk about it. One Night at Flumpty's 2, in addition to being the best possible name for the sequel to One Night at Flumpty's, also brought about a far more memorable experience, with a slew of unique gameplay mechanics, an arguably better and more interesting set of visuals. Even minor things for a fan-made Five Nights at Freddy's game like sound design have been massively improved upon. This game is just one good idea on top of another, and it's not perfect, what Fangame is, but there's a lot of good things to mention here, so yeah, let's crack this one open. So, gameplay. Before I even discuss mechanics, I want to praise Jonochrome for creating a FNAF fan game that relies on near minimal RNG. Holy shit, it's amazing. RNG, random number generation. It's apparent in nearly every game you'll ever play, and exists as a way to individualize the gameplay experience. It can be as subtle as randomizing how much damage an enemy might do to a player in a combat-intensive game, or as relied upon as beating 420 mode in the first Freddy's game, where in that case, yeah, it's complete luck on if you ever even end up beating the first night, no matter how sharp you are during gameplay. Flumpty's 2 has RNG, but I never once felt cheated out of beating the night, or that I was being too overwhelmed at any point. Yeah, it's pretty good. Each one of the characters in this game gives you just enough warning beforehand. The only times I ever found myself losing were when I'd just forget where one of the buggers were, or if I took too much of a risk without thinking about the consequences. Now, the mechanics themselves in this game? I won't pretend that Jonochrome pioneered each and every game mechanic here, but each one's been tweaked to near perfection to work well with each other. Explain the thing. Explain the thing first. Alright, yeah. So, you, the player, are situated in... dunno. There's kind of an interesting story behind it though. I took the opportunity to look at both the developer commentaries behind Flumpty's 1 and 2, and the amount of insight they provide is genuinely pretty in-depth and they're super interesting. I highly recommend you check them out. Apparently the office concept here was genuinely just something Jonochrome dreamed about one time, with a switch in the middle of the room that flipped the lights on and off. If the light's turned off then you're safe, but if it's left on when any one of the monsters are peeking inside your abode...
If your lights are on, they'll come find you and rip you a brand new face.
Yeah. Okay, so according to the guy, it's meant to resemble a garage. That's how we say garage in the UK. And, yeah, that does make a tad bit of sense. Surprisingly enough, the exposure meter also came about in a separate dream, where if Super Mario was spotted by an enemy, a bar on the bottom right would begin to fill up, and whenever it was full, all the enemies would begin attacking him. Sure. I've not ever seen anything like that in a fan game before, to be honest. It's like a reverse barrel meter, it's brilliant. Anyway, you're also tasked with keeping the owl out of your quote-unquote office. He's the one character that doesn't work like the rest of these boys. He's almost pretty much like Foxy from the first Freddy's game, but every so often he'll leave the pisser and proceed to tunnel down either the left or right vent. The catch being that you can only have one vent closed at a time, so if you can't manage to catch which vent he's in at any given time and he's gunning it for you, it's game over, regardless of where your exposure meter's at. Actually, that's not entirely true. Technically, there's one other dude that's another incentive to look at the cameras. Every once in a while you get a alerting you that the red man's coming after you, and the only way to stop him is... yeah, this guy's not much of a threat. So, surprisingly enough, each character this time around works totally independently from one another, sort of. Flumpty, and introducing the eyesore all work fairly similarly. They'll walk around the complex only to eventually appear in the hallway ahead of you. However, their behavior is slightly different. Flumpty's active from the very beginning, but as a debuff, is the only character who won't immediately raise your exposure meter if he's in front of you. Birthday Boy Blam becomes active a tad later, but you gotta check the right camera for the frame that appears right before he visits your office. They'll straight up appear without warning. And this chunky ribeye steak eye cholesterol collection of corpses is pretty aggressive, but only sticks around after 3 or 4 AM. So who else is here, man? Grunkfuss is back, baby, and he's one tricky shit. At around 2 AM, a patience countdown appears next to the bastard, ticking down 30 counts per second. And once it reaches 0, he'll immediately stick his head through a hole in your office. Yep, Golden Flumpty returns and behaves pretty much identical to how he did in Flumpty's 1. Props where props are due though, with how much more you're relying on checking the cameras this time around, he did get me indirectly killed a couple of times, so slightly less useless this time around. The only character we don't see return is the Beaver, who canonically died after falling down the toilet, and you know what, happy travels to him. So yeah, that makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 returning characters. Oh, what, you don't remember this guy from the first game? Well, that's because of a tad bit of... in all honesty, it actually works really well. I had no idea what the purpose of these eyes in Flumpty's 1 were. Apparently, the remaining number of eyes was indicative of how many camera flips you had left in the presence of Grunkfuss the Clown. Jonochrome said it himself. It was a pretty subtle mechanic, and I never would have noticed it if not for the dev commentary. But hey, taking that ultimately pretty useless concept and turning it into a sausage party totally works. It's a dinosaur made from the corpses of the people Flumpty's killed, and hold on a second. Alrighty, let's talk about the... Yeah, there's no plot here, you silly sausage. Basically the same as the first game, survive until 6 and you'll become Flumpty's best friend. If you lose, you'll turn into one of these poor sods. Are you happy now? But hey, what about the various unique visual elements and sound design that makes an otherwise decent Fangame genuinely stand out? Well, I'm glad you asked, because Flumpty's 2 is brimming with polish, man. The characters and environments in this game are genuinely just pleasing to look at. The backgrounds are more diverse, everything's crisp, and the colours are sharp, but blend super well when the backdrop calls for it. There's a lot going on this time around, but I believe Jonochrome's accommodated for everything really nicely. Oh, and the dumb office Easter eggs? Yeah, sometimes when you flip down the monitor, Piglet will stare at you. Fun, right? One thing I didn't notice during my playthrough that looking back is super obvious, but I missed because I'm just a stupid dumb idiot. There's hardly a hint of blue in this game. I mean, visually there's a tad bit, but that's just something that Jonochrome consciously decided to do. Similar to in Flumpty's 1, where he avoided the colour green, and that's something I haven't really thought about before with any of these fan games. Limiting your colour palette by one colour might sound a tad weird, but going by the whole, a restrictive palette draws out your creativity. Yeah, I don't know, maybe it was just an aesthetic decision, but it's definitely interesting. Oh, and speaking of Flumpty's 1, can we just take a second to talk about how much of a pleb I am? Because I had a few misconceptions in the last episode. The red man, ladies and gentlemen, he walks around after 3 or 4 AM, and whatever camera he's on is disabled temporarily. The whole thing with the eyes on the game over screen is just parodying the Freddy's 1 game over screen. How the hell did I miss this? The Beaver has friggin' knife feet. Oh, and apparently Golden Freddy works the same as Golden Flumpty in the first game. You just flip the monitor and he disappears. I never knew this. What's this? Hey man, you want to talk good sound design? Bro. Okay, so it's not like the friggin' pinnacle of all sound design, but it's damn good. The entire game has this aura of orchestral bliss. This mostly comes from the record player that will play the piece you're hearing now. But when any of the monsters check in on you, you get a little... See, it's a swift little dramatic sting, it's great. But when one of them get you, it's like... Oh man, this game knows that it doesn't need to rely on ear-splitting screams to ramp up the tension. And I think using music as a way to set the mood and spook the player is clever and works well here. Why haven't more fan games done this? I know Flumpty's 1 didn't do this, but that was much more of an inherently silly game, so the intentionally silly screams worked. But yeah, I'd argue this is far more fitting and unique to Flumpty's 2. Oh, and speaking of the screams, yeah, each character makes their own sounds, and that's 1 point over every Freddy's game. Yeah, that's all I really wanted to bring up. Most of the other sound cues in this game are pretty decent, about what you'd expect. I just really like this game's weird quirks, man. Now, the burning question on everyone's mind is... And to that I say... No reason. The fact that Flumpty's 2 isn't grounded in reality or bound by trying to scare the player works incredibly well to its advantage. The fact that there's really no reason for anything going on means the creativity for the mechanics isn't hindered and ultimately contributes to just a fun fan game. There's none of that, yeah, there's only one mechanic, so we gotta make the gameplay as boring as humanly possible with a cast of unpredictable piece of shit phantoms. No, everything is purely built around gameplay, and I really admire that here. Of course, that's not to say you can't have a serious fan game with some decent mechanics, but it's far easier to focus on building some decent mechanics when there's nothing canonically you gotta worry about, you know? And as a result of all this, the mechanics in Flumpty's 2 are some of the most decent I've come across in the fan dev community. Hell, I stole the charging mechanic from this game and shoved it into my own crappy little fan game back in 2016. I'm criminal scum. Anyway, beat the night and hey, cute little 8-bit ending thingy featuring a remixed version of the ending theme from the first game. Very nice. Now there's one last thing I wanted to mention. I won't dwell on it for too long, but Hard-boiled mode. Now yes, one night of Flumpty's, suck your nan. This is the hard mode that the Earth needed, and surprisingly enough, I think it fits perfectly here. Oh, and in addition to a more difficult experience, this time around the record player plays an orchestral rendition of the Toreador March, so yeah, that's forever associated with my absolute failure. Thanks, Jonochrome. The first night of this game did take me a good few tries to get through, wading through each of the mechanics, learning how the game reacts and responds, how the enemies work. Sure, I made it through in one piece, but hard-boiled is where the real challenge begins. Like, the first night is good enough of a time, but mastering the game is what night 2's for. I spent literal hours on this mode. I made it well into 5 AM, 5 friggin' times, it was nuts. And like, I got frustrated with it, but again, it always felt fair to me. Like, nothing was random to the point that anything felt out of my control, if that makes any sense. It was strategy after strategy after strategy. First, I was doing pretty much what I was doing in the first night, checking each and every camera with no rhyme or reason. Then as time progressed, I realised I could check less and less cameras before narrowing it down to only 4 cameras. Cam 6 and 7 to check who's outside the office, Cam 5 to check the right vent shaft, and Cam 2 to check on Grunkfast. The decent thing about the owl is that if you don't check the corresponding vent cam that he's in once he's left the urinal, you're actually given a lot more time before he slams into the closed vent, meaning less time you'll even have to deal with him. I kept the left vent closed at all times unless I found him on Cam 5, and I think that was definitely the right way to go about it. If he's not there, I don't have to worry about him at all. That was the strategy I used that I finally ended up winning with, but one I tried about 3 times was legitimately just keeping the lights off 99% of the time, only occasionally checking Cam 5 to see if the owl was shooting down the right vent shaft. But there's got to be a failsafe of some kind, because I didn't make it more than 3 hours before I'd check that camera, find nobody in it, and die to him seconds later. To be fair, winning quote-unquote legitimately was far more rewarding anyway, and hey, once you beat Hardboiled, you get a FNAF 3-esque newspaper with tidbits about the game and stuff, which is definitely neat. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole gist of it all. No, there's no extra content after this, that's all there really is to show off. So, final thoughts. Flumpty's 2. Damn, this is a good one. Difficulty balancing, sound design, soundtrack, visuals, game mechanics, everything works in unison to form this compact experience that lends itself to being one of my favourite fan games of all time. No, it's not overly serious or even really has that much of a plot. These 2 Flumpty's games are basically glorified shitposts, let's be real here. But they know that and run with it, and that's something people really seem to get a kick out of. At the core of it all, both these games are just comedic parallels of the first 2 Freddy's games. Hell, even the teasers for Flumpty's 2 are reminiscent of select Freddy's 2 and 3 teasers, with this one in particular, while very obviously parodying the no place to run and one place to hide teaser, weirdly enough almost foreshadows that one sister location teaser. Very strange. Anyway, yeah, that's it. I'm still working on, like, ending these reviews. Goddamn, Candy 3 reviews next, boys and girls. We're not sexist on the show. Oh, you know what? Come to think of it, comparing the first 2 Candies and Flumpty's games, like, there are some considerable similarities there, are there not? Like, both first entries were essentially the first FNAF game with some slight differences, and the second games are both visually reminiscent of FNAF 2 but mechanically work very differently. Yeah, I don't know, just a passing thought. Yeah, that's fun. Anyway, I should mention, go check out Jonochrome. He makes some other genuinely cool stuff. His YouTube channel, he's uploaded a lot of pretty funny animations and stuff. Yeah, I know I'm definitely going to be following him after this as well, see what he's up to. Because he doesn't just do these fan games, hasn't made... Why am I even saying that? He hasn't made one in like 5 years. Anyway, go check him out. Go check out the rest of the fan game reviews. Check out Flumpty's 2. Candy 3 review coming next. Alright, bye!